Biology is a comprehensive science that studies life from different points, from the structure of molecules and atoms, to the biology evolutionary development of populations, to other areas and biology branches that have been incorporated over time. These branches are varied, such as anthropology, anatomy, botany, biomedicine, etc. This list is not exhaustive, since every day some knowledge about life is integrated and more tools are constantly created so we can maintain and understand life. Now, how did life originate on the planet? Some persistent questions that the human ask is how and why are we on the planet that we call Earth? The answer of the history of humanity are varied, but we still don't have one that leaves us satisfied. For centuries, it was believed that a supreme being created life. Some others suggest that life was created on the volcanoes or in the ocean. But the fact is that here we are, and we are part of the vast variety of living things that inhabit the third planet that revolves the sun. And the only truth until now is that everything that has happened rise to the system based on DNA and RNA, capable of storing information and create various molecules and also editing their modifications. We have not seen the end of the story yet. That's why it's relevant to continue looking for the answer of the question, how did life originate on the planet?
Living things have their own characteristics that define them as living things. One of them is genetic code, which is a sequence of nutritious bases that together can produce what is called words that can be read by all living things. Another characteristic of living things is reproduction. All living things must reproduce among themselves in order to prevail as a species. Another example is growth. All living things must increase their volume, in other words, grow. Another characteristic is metabolism. Living things use energy. This means they take energy from their external environment and use it from their own benefit. Another characteristic of living things is their organization. In all living things, components are very organized and organized complexly. Another characteristic is the response to stimuli. All living things have perception and response to stimuli, either that come from the external or internal environment. Another characteristic is the homeostasis. The homeostasis is a self-regulation of the phenomena that leads to conservation. Adaptation and evolution is another characteristic of living things. This is individual, because even though they are from the same species, they can have slightly different traits. These traits may leave or stay depending on natural selection. Prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells have a lot of differences, but the most notables are, for example, their reproduction. Prokaryotic cells have an asexual reproduction, while eukaryotic cells have sexual reproduction. Prokaryotic cells are unicellular, and eukaryotic cells are multicellular. While eukaryotic cells have a nucleus and a mitochondria, prokaryotic cells doesn't. Another difference is their chemical structure. Their chemical structure from the prokaryotic cells is mostly complex. In the other side, eukaryotic cells, their chemical structure is very simple.
Hello, my name is Gustavo Ángel Hidalgo Romero, and we're going to talk about the history of microscope. The earliest invention of a magnifying lens occurred in the Syrian Empire in 750 before Christ. The capacity of magnification was minimal and took hundreds of years to develop it. Then, who invented the compound microscope? Well, we don't know who did it, but we do know is that it was invented between the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 7th century. The first person who called this invention as a microscope was Giovanni Fabber in 1625. Then, in 1665, Robert Hooke linked the microscope with the cell, and the microscope he used allowed him to reach magnifications up to 50 times. Then, years later, Anton van Leeuwenhoek used a new technique that allowed him to reach magnifications up to 200 times, and by the 19th century, It was possible to perfect the microscope and it became a handy tool. History of the cell. In 1665, Robert Hooke observed the bark of a cork oak and noticed that its tissue was made of small spaces. He named these small spaces as cells. Some years later, Anton van Leeuwenhoek observed and described in more details cells such as spermatozoa and protozoa and even some bacteria. In 1831, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus in plant cells, and by the year of 1838, Johannes Purkinje referred the liquid that fills the cell as protoplasm. In this same year, Matthias Leiden and Friedrich Schwann postulate that vegetables and animals are made up of cells. Finally, in 1855, Rudolf Virchow postulated that every cell comes from a pre-existing one. Cell theory. There are 4 postulates in which 3 of them are recognized as authors: Schwann, Leiden, and Virchow. First postulate. The cell is the morphological and structural unit of all living things. Second postulate. Omnicellula ex cellula, which means every cell comes from a pre-existing one. Third postulate. The cell is the physiological unit of life. And the fourth postulate is that the cell contains the hereditary information. We can add a 5th postulate, which is the disease begins in the cell. Hello, my name is Gustavo Ángel Hidalgo Romero, and we're going to talk about the history of microscope. The earliest invention of a magnifying lens occurred in the Syrian Empire in 750 before Christ. The capacity of magnification was minimal and took hundreds of years to develop it. Then, who invented the compound microscope? Well, we don't know who did it, but we do know is that it was invented between the end of the 16th century and the beginning of the 7th century. The first person who called this invention as a microscope was Giovanni Fugger in 1625. Then, in 1665, Robert Hooke linked the microscope with the cell, and the microscope he used allowed him to reach magnifications up to 50 times. Then, years later, Anton van Leeuwenhoek used a new technique that allowed him to reach magnifications up to 200 times, and by the 19th century, it was possible to perfect the microscope and it became a handy tool. History of the cell. In 1665, Robert Hooke observed the bark of a cork oak and noticed that its tissue was made of small spaces. He named these small spaces as cells. Some years later, Anton van Leeuwenhoek observed and described in more details cells such as spermatozoa and protozoa and even some bacteria. In 1831, Robert Brown discovered the nucleus in plant cells, and by the year of 1838, Johannes Purkinje referred the liquid that fills the cell as protoplasm. In this same year, Matthias Leiden and Friedrich Schwann postulate that vegetables and animals are made up of cells. Finally, in 1855, Rudolf Virchow postulated that every cell comes from a pre-existing one. Cell theory. There are 4 postulates in which 3 of them are recognized as authors: Schwann, Leiden, and Virchow. First postulate. The cell is the morphological and structural unit of all living things. Second postulate. Omnicellula ex cellula, which means every cell comes from a pre-existing one. Third postulate. The cell is the physiological unit of life. And the fourth postulate is that the cell contains the hereditary information. We can add a 5th postulate, which is the disease begins in the cell.
Hi, Mr. Cruz. My name is David. I'm part of Team 4, I guess, or Team 3, one of those two. But and my topic was number 4, the cell transport and its type of organization. Well, let me start explaining. Oh, by the way, when I do this, there will be an image showing up. So yeah, that's something. Passive transport. The passive transport occurs when substances cross the plasma membrane without any input of energy from the cell. No energy is needed because the substances are moving from an area where they have a higher concentration to an area where they have a lower concentration. Concentration refers to the number of particles of a substance per unit of volume. The more particles of a substance in a given volume, the higher the concentration. A substance always moves from an area where it is more concentrated to an area where it is less concentrated. It's a little like a bar rolling down a hill. It goes by itself without any input of extra energy. There are several types of passive transport, including simple diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. Each type, I will describe it soon. And here's an example of passive transport. Well, okay. Active transport. Active transport occurs when energy is needed for a substance to move across a plasma membrane. Energy is needed because the substance is moving from an area of lower concentration to an area of higher concentration. This is a little like moving a ball uphill. It can be done without adding energy. The energy for active transports comes from the energy carrying molecule called ATP. Like passive transport, active transport may also involve transport proteins. I'm going fast, but I just have like 3 minutes and I'm half the way. Simple diffusion. Diffusion is the movement of a substance across a membrane due to a difference in concentration without any help from other molecules. The substance simply moves from the side of the membrane where it is more concentrated to the side where it is less concentrated. Boop. Facilitated diffusion. Water and many other substances cannot simply diffuse across a membrane. Hydrophilic molecules, charged ions, and relatively large molecules such as glucose all need help with diffusion. The help comes from special proteins in the membrane known as transport proteins. Diffusion with the help of transport proteins is called facilitated diffusion. There are several types of transport proteins, including channel proteins and carrier proteins. And endocytosis. Okay, I'm gonna explain some of the basics of transport. I don't want to give you the whole definition, so I will just give you the 2 basic concepts of this. Endocytosis is a type of vesicle transport that moves a substance into the cell. The plasma membrane completely engulfs the substance into the cell. When an entire cell is engulfed, the process is called phagocytosis. When fluid is engulfed, the process is called pinocytosis. And there's exocytosis too, and I'm gonna talk about it. Oh yeah, by the way. Exocytosis is a type of vesicle transport that moves a substance out of the cell. A vesicle containing the substance moves through the cytoplasm to the cell membrane. Then the vesicle membrane fuses with the cell membrane, and the substance is released outside the cell. You can watch. Okay, no, sorry. I get out of there. Well, no, yeah, actually, you can watch an image of that here. And then is the organization of all these things. Okay. We know organization is required on everything, including anatomy, biology, and all that. For example, in a workplace, you can have the builder man to be on the finances place and the finances man being on building things. It's not how it works. It won't be organized and it will make almost everything fall. And so that works with the body. The body just have the perfect quantities of salt, iron, all the things that I just explained to work. So yeah, if you eat so much, you're gonna go fat, but the body will organize itself. Because that's how nature, biology, and all that works. It must be in order to work. I guess I explained myself pretty good in that one. You're gonna give me a point, Mr. Cruz. Okay, and here's an image. Thanks for watching. I'm gonna put the video of my partner next. Thank you.
So now I'm going to talk about health. Health is a natural disposition. According to the World Health Organization, it's a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being and not merely the absence of disease. For other hand, disease is an unnatural condition and is the loss of balance and homeostasis. This breaks the balance of the organism and causes disordered lifestyles or disturbance in the dynamic balance of the physical bodies. Adolescence stage is an stage characterized by the transition between childhood and adulthood, which implies physical, cognitive, and physiological change. This stage occurs between the age of 11 and 19, while the puberty is a period in which a person develops sexual maturity and reproductive capacity, and occurs before the age of 10 years. But the adolescent is no longer the same as was child. Well, when you are adolescent, you still need to play, the affection of his parents, and caloric foods, and when you are a child, you only eat, play, and task by adults. Adolescents are considered healthy people because physically their body has the strength to resist disease, even better than young children and older adults. We will talk about healthy lifestyles. Lifestyles are related to social and cultural behaviors pertaining to diverse groups, including social classes and national groups. They are related to personal habits and have been studied because of the impacts they have on people. Healthy lifestyles help to cope with threatening situations, to avoid physical illnesses, or to resist in better way physical or emotional sufferings. Some behaviors that lead to health are sleep between 7 and 8 hours a day, have breakfast every day, and perform 3 meals a day, practice physical activity regularly, among others. Each person is responsible for their physical, emotional, and social health because also each one can decide when to take refreshment every day instead of water, or there are variables of life that complicate autonomy in decision making, such as the economic situation or living in areas that are in situation of violence. However, despite these variables, and perhaps with greater difficulty, they can be taken other action alternatives.
The organ systems. There are a lot of them. Like there is the digestive system, the skeletal system, the urinary system, the reproductive, etc. And each of them have a function. Like for example, the respiratory system. It exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide between blood, air, and body tissues, or the muscular system that provides movement, support, and heat production to our body, or one that can be pretty important in these times can be the immune system that protects our body from viruses and bacteria which cause diseases. Now, if one of them stops working well, we will lose the main purpose of all of them, that is to maintain the stability of our body. Homeostasis. Claude Bernard observed the stability of psychological parameters, and in 1865 he wrote, "All the vital mechanisms, vary as they are, have only one object, to preserve constant the internal environment." And in 1928, Walter B. Cannon coined the term homeostasis to define and describe the regulation of this internal environment. Homeostasis refers to the quality of an organism to preserve the internal conditions despite the changing conditions on its interior or exterior. It means equal state, and the process of maintaining an internal condition inside the organisms is done by metabolisms, either by anabolic reactions or catabolic reactions. The preservation of this is done by mechanisms of cell regulations, which can be controlled by negative feedback or positive feedback. An example of negative feedback is homeostasis of blood glucose, and for the positive feedback, a good example can be the secretion of milk during lactation.